Well, welcome. This is Professor David Loertscher from the School of Information in San Jose State University, and it is my great privilege to introduce and have a conversation with Keith Curry-Lance, who is so well known across the whole profession. And Keith, just introduce yourself a little bit and then tell us what all of your data says about the number of school librarians across time that we have in the U.S.
Well, David, as you know, I was at the Colorado State Library for a little over 2 decades, running the Library Research Service. During that time, we got started doing school library impact studies. I worked on those through about 2014. Continuing into my semi-retirement. Around the middle of the 2010s, Deborah Cockle and I started collaborating on research. And 3 years ago, we got a grant from IMLS to do a project called SLIDE, the School Librarian Investigation - Decline or Evolution ? And so that's how I've spent the last 3 years. We just wrapped up that project in August. We have lots of publications, infographics, videos. If you haven't seen the website, go to libslide.org, libslide.org. In addition to all of our reports and infographics and videos, we have dynamic tools that provide you ready access to all the data that's available from the federal government about school librarian staffing. So based on those data sets, here's what we know. We have data at the district level every year from something called the Common Core of Data. And they collect data about school finances and certain kinds of school staffing and various other things. What we know from that for the 2021-22 school year is that there were 92,000 regular public schools in local school districts. There were 39,000 FTEs of school librarians. Obviously, there's a big gap there. The COVID phenomenon had a negative impact on us, just as it did everybody else in education. We did a special report as part of SLIDE about the impact of COVID. Again, that's on the website. In that report, we compared the 2018-19 school year, the last full year before COVID, with 2020-21, at the time, the latest data, and the first school year that began with COVID being a known thing. During that 2-year period, 18-19 to 2021, we lost 1,800 FTEs of school librarians. We didn't quite know what to make of that. We knew we'd had declines in years past for a while. We wanted some context for that. So we looked at the previous 2-year period, 2016-17 to 2018-19. What we saw during that 2-year period was a loss of 1,000 FTEs. So we can attribute an additional 800 FTE decline as of 2021 to COVID. We now have data for the 21-22 school year, which is a little more hopeful looking. Things have at least leveled off. We actually had a net gain nationwide of 85 FTEs. Still leaves us a lot of pre-COVID losses to make up, obviously. But at least things leveled off. We also see a very complex environment where very different kinds of changes are happening from state to state. And I'll just give you the big numbers and the superlatives. 27 states reported gains in librarian FTEs between 2021 and 21-22. Again, that's the latest year of data right now. 20 states reported losses. So a few more states reported gains than losses. The superlatives in those groups are illustrative. In the states, 27 states that gained, the state that reported the largest gain was New York, which reported 88 more FTEs in 21-22 than they had in 2021. So that suggests a pretty strong boost post-COVID, coming back from COVID in their case. On the flip side, among those 20 states that reported ongoing losses in 21-22, Texas reported 101 fewer FTEs than they had the year before in the 2021 school year. So a very different environment from state to state. If you want to keep up with what's going on in terms of those state to state changes year by year, look at something else that's posted on our website. If you get the Library and Book Trade Almanac, what some of us older folks remember as the Bowker Annual, you'll find an article in there every year called School Librarian Employment in the United States. And the two most recent data years we compare and sort of tell you where things stand. And we'll be doing that article again this year for the 2024 edition. So you can expect to see that in sometime in the later half of this calendar year. That's how things look data-wise at the moment. David?
Okay, so one other thing that I think you really did well was interviews of about 49 different administrators.
Yes.
And tell us the positives and the negatives that you found in as you looked at what administrators were saying to you about gains or losses or whatever.
Well, first of all, kudos to all 49 people who agreed to be interviewed because, mind you, we interviewed them smack in the middle of COVID. How we got anyone to talk to us, I'm not quite sure. But we did get 49 district administrators, mostly superintendents or assistant superintendents, but a few other types of positions at the district level. We had some overlap. Some of them talked about both gains and losses. Of the 49 interviewees, 28 of them talked about gains, 24 of them talked about losses. So we had three that were in both camps. Of the ones who gained, we asked them open-ended questions about why did you make the decisions you made about school librarian staffing. In the case of those 28 who reported gains, the reasons they gave most often concerned equity, educational equity. And the thing they mentioned most often about school librarians in connection with putting a high value on educational equity was seeing a really strong instructional role for school librarians. School librarians teaching all by themselves, standalone teaching. They thought that was a real priority, that they saw librarians as teachers, and they believed they had something to teach that was critical to ensuring educational equity. The second most popular theme among our 28 gaining interviewees was that they valued the teaching role of librarians and what they contribute to teaching overall in their schools. They all mentioned collaboration with teachers. These are administrators who understand the contributions school librarians can make when they have the ability to collaborate with classroom teachers. Something else they valued a lot was being sure their teachers had planning time. And this, frankly, is something that's a little counter the conventional wisdom in the school library community. They told us that they valued school librarians because it was only because they could have library periods for their kids that they could give planning periods to their teachers. Then they didn't see librarians as babysitters. They believed there were things librarians could teach during those library periods they valued and that they wanted to be taught. The third theme was one that actually occurred on both sides among gainers and losers. We called it the new leadership theme. These were administrators who reported, I'm a new administrator, or I work for a new administrator, and what has happened as a result of our new administration is we have a major change in priorities. And in these particular districts, one of those big changes in priorities was we decided we're going to have librarians more comprehensively than we've had them in the past. I was telling David earlier when we were talking about this session that it was downright dogmatic in some senses. Our interviewers pressed, why did your new administration decide it was important to have school librarians? And basically the answer was, because I said so. These are people who have obviously have positive experiences with school librarians. They understand their value, and they're the boss now. So they said, we're going to have librarians. The fourth theme concerned a rather small group of states. We had something in the vicinity of, I think it's around 15 states that actually have some kind of mandate in law or regulation about school librarian staffing. Very often it's formula driven. If you have X level of enrollment, you have to have a half-time librarian. If you have X level of higher enrollment, you have to have a full-time librarian, something like that. What some of our interviewees told us was we saw an opportunity to get into compliance with our state mandate in a way that we were not when I walked in the door. So we got some new money, and we decided the way we were going to spend that new money was to hire more librarian staffing so that we would meet that state mandate. So that's what we heard on the plus side. Now, it might be tempting to say, well, let's just not talk about the negative side. But I think there's a lot to learn from them too. You won't be surprised what we heard far and away the most often, because it's the thing we always hear when we hear that positions are being threatened. The major theme on the losing side was we need more classroom teachers. And occasionally they also mentioned other kinds of specialists. And these situations were ones in which the school was in great duress just to have a teacher in every classroom. And what they said to us was, we looked at our highly qualified librarian, who we value very much in their librarian role, but they're also highly qualified teachers. And we had a vacancy we couldn't fill any other way. So we asked that librarian to go back to the classroom. Again, far more often than not, they made a point. It wasn't because we wanted to. We didn't want to take the librarian out of our library, but our backs were against the wall, and we had to get another teacher in the classroom. Then we also heard that the flip side of that new leadership theme. New administrators came in, they had different priorities. They felt pressed for money in their budgets, and they decided the way to free up some money was to take the librarian position out. Were among our 49 interviews, there were 2 or 3 that actually said to our interviewers, we think librarians are kind of obsolete. They were not very numerous, fortunately. And then the third most frequent theme we heard among the districts that lost librarians is one I think we overlook the most and don't consider how we might address it the most. Several of our interviewees said, I didn't decide not to have a librarian anymore. I wanted a librarian. I couldn't come up with one. A lot of these folks are in small school districts, in more isolated districts, in outlying towns or rural areas, and they literally couldn't find anybody to come to their community and work as a school librarian. We had one very interesting case. Again, we only had 49 interviewees, so not a huge number. But out of those 49 interviewees, out of the 24 that reported losing librarians, one of them said, we actually identified somebody who we wanted to hire and who was willing to come to our community, and then we lost them because they started preparing to move to our community, and what they discovered when they got here was they literally couldn't afford to live in this community.
Oh.
So all kinds of factors come into play. Sometimes there are formulas that states or districts impose on decision makers. They don't really feel like they have much choice. They're just doing what the rules tell them they have to do. In some cases, there are hard realities that they have to deal with. Having a teacher in every classroom, or simply not being able to find someone to fill a position that prevent them from doing so. So we need to not only encourage the circumstances we heard about in all of those gaining themes. Librarians have a role in contributing to educational equity. Librarians have important things to teach. If the school leadership supports them, they can have a huge impact. And if their state has or district has a mandate, they should get into compliance with it. On the flip side, we need responses to all of those situations where positions are being lost. How do we respond to an administrator who says, I have to have one more teacher in a classroom? The librarian is my last resort. That's the only way I could see to get that position filled. We need to come up with responses. We need to give them alternative ways to solve that problem rather than taking the librarian out of the library. If there are new administrators who don't have experience with librarians or don't value them, we need to figure out how to respond to those people too. And then finally, that last circumstance I mentioned, sometimes it's a matter of simply not being able to find a librarian to fill a vacancy. What do we do then? How do we address those pipeline issues? How do we address the issue of filling positions in smaller, more outlying communities? Those are the big challenges, I think, that we face in trying to reverse the trends in school librarian employment.
Well, I absolutely appreciate that view from, the larger data sets down to, down to individual states and schools. So positives and negatives, more negative perhaps than positive. What I've been doing, Keith, over the last few years is looking from the bottom up. In other words, I look at schools through what's called the alivelibrary.info website. I have looked at and interviewed over 25 world-class school librarians. And during those interviews, plus the ones that are at this conference that are speaking here, we have noticed certain things happen at the building level that make the librarian really visible and indispensable. And what happens, it seems to be that the person accepts a position and they bring with them all of the theory of libraries and what they should do, both the consumption of knowledge and the creation of knowledge. And then they get a feel for the community, the parents, the kind of kids that are there, the kinds of goals the administrators want to have happen, the kinds of teachers who are really interested in pushing ahead. And what they seem to do is to combine their one expertise to try to make a difference across the school. And boy, do they ever succeed. And they are people that, if somebody suggested that they be fired. There'd be marches in the street and at the school board and so far. But I think that is so. That's on the. So what does that mean to the future of anybody listening to this broadcast and conference? I think for those who are fortunate enough to be a full-time person in a school who has done these things that these super folks have done, they are really showing the way and earning their keep, right? So if they, with 2 master's degrees, usually some of them have doctorates, and they are earning their keep because they make a major difference with this kid and that kid and the school as a whole. Now, that's not a way to solve the national problem, but it does make a difference school by school by school, so that we can say to the world, when librarians realize that the changes have been happening across the last decade very rapidly, that the color of the kids has changed much more to black and brown. Cultures have changed. Kids' social and emotional learning has changed, but we know how to change to meet those goals. And so whether we are called librarians or some other kind of designation, innovation director in the school or whatever, we have certain people in all of education, reading specialists, technology people, who do make a difference locally. So I guess that's my perspective, that yes, in an age when things seem to be going down, just bloom where you're planted, and do the best. Don't let the geranium on the window, die, and the teacher just went on. And so I guess that's my perspective. So I guess, from macro, we learn from the macro data, and also from data from the individual schools, like Keith did, with administrators. Some of them kind of get it, and they know how to get a good person if they can get one, and they know the difference they make. And that seems to be, until we can get some major project going on, like Library Power, which was $43 million, and it was across many school districts. But that seems to be one way of we've got to have 3 or 4 different major attacks. So,
David, let me offer some other ideas too. I think there are a lot of things that we could do that could make a big difference, that could be organized at a district or state and maybe even national levels. Something people could try is talking to state education and library leaders about ways that librarians who have full-time jobs can reach out to schools in their own and other school districts that either don't have enough librarians, or in some cases don't have any librarians at all. One of the challenges in no librarian districts is there's no one there to advocate for them. So we need to come in from outside and say, maybe have, sister school programs focus on library contributions for a sister school that doesn't have a library. They might learn something then. It might inspire them to create or recreate that position. We talked about the problem of not being able to find people to fill vacancies. When I was at the Colorado State Library, we did something many years ago now that is happening these days and should probably happen even more. And it's what are called grow your own programs. If you're having trouble recruiting people to come to an isolated area to work as a school librarian, what we did in Colorado back in the day I'm aware of is we had those schools identify their best teachers and provided funding to help those teachers get the additional credentials they need to become school librarians. In other words, don't try to get someone to move to your community to become a school librarian. Find someone in your community who you can turn into a school librarian.
That's correct. Yeah.
And then finally, there are so many school librarians who are not in full-time single school jobs. They're juggling several schools, or they're working at the district level with aides or other people at the building level. There are a lot of different models under which school librarians are employed these days. And a lot of them, admittedly, are not ideal. They're not what we feel is the most impactful way for a school librarian to work. Nonetheless, it's the way their job is set up. If we don't want to create standards for those other kinds of situations, the very least we could do is generate some best practices documents that tell people in those other kinds of situations how they can make the most of what they have got to work with. And perhaps once they're able to do that and show more impact in those kinds of ways, that might help to change their situation or the situation in other schools in their districts, so that there is more access to school librarians for their students and their teachers.
Actually, Keith, that's what Canada has just accomplished. They call them ladders, and they are presenting. Anita Kirkland is presenting at this conference, and probably worth looking, because they have their documents, and that's exactly you're describing. Best practices, and you keep climbing the ladder depending on where you are and where you want to move. So
yeah, we need to face the reality that people are having to work in and help them make the best of that in hopes of getting to the more ideal situation.
Exactly. Well, thank you so very much, Dr. Lance, for your contributions over so many decades, and onward. We think as long as you can keep helping this profession understand where it is, what its challenges are, et cetera, et cetera. So thank you so very much, and keep going.
Thank you, David.